Go ahead. Welcome, everyone, to Montana District Committee on Ministry Orientation to Ministry. I'm Margaret Gillikin, the chair of the committee, and I serve in Helena, Montana, as the lead pastor of Helena United Methodist Ministries, which encompasses both St. Paul's and Covenant United Methodist churches. What we're doing today is a requirement of the Book of Discipline for all candidates for ministry. Ideally, this orientation takes place at the very beginning of when someone is feeling called to ministry. And as many of us have discovered in the course of our discernment processes, things don't always fall out in the ideal manner. And so wherever you are in this process, I invite you to listen from a place of curiosity and with a lens of learning. If nothing else, if you are already almost at your final destination, it is going to be amazing how quickly you're going to need to advise someone else on discerning a call to ministry. And so this information is going to be useful wherever you are in your own discernment process. So the United Methodist Church is quite generous in having multiple forms of credentialed ministry and ways to serve. And so I'm going to invite Jean Hanning to start us off with speaking about several forms of the ministry of laity. And for those of you in Montana who haven't met Jean before, he is the camp manager of Beaver Creek Youth Camp in southern Colorado. And so from the northernmost part of the conference to the southernmost conference, we'll turn it over to Jean to share a little bit of what he knows about lay ministries. Thanks,
Thank you,
Jean.
Margaret. I am the Trinity District co-director for Lay Servant Ministries. So that's how I think part of why Margaret contacted me, and she and I've had an opportunity to work together on a lot of different things. Any of us that are not clergy and are in service in God's kingdom are lay servants. The difference between that and a certified lay servant is the fact that we have indicated that we are excited about this and would like to be involved in different ways, and lets people know that we can do that. To be a certified lay servant, you need to take the basic course. And in our conference, it's been renamed to Foundation of Lay Servant Ministries. So you'll see it both ways. And then one advanced course, and there's a bunch of them out there. The next differentiation would be a certified lay speaker, and that is a person who has identified and been called to actually speak from the pulpit if a pastor is gone, or by invitation of a pastor or district superintendent or something like that. To get that certification, you have to have basic and then 6 other courses, one of which is discovering your spiritual gifts. And then there's several others, and I'm going to give you, in a minute, I'll put up an email address in the chat, or not, sorry, a website address in the chat where you can get all of this information at once and gives everything about it. So that's one other place that you can be as a certified lay speaker, and you can speak in any other United Methodist church. Now, one thing that Margaret always made sure that I made clear is that you don't have to have any certifications to speak in a church if you're invited by the pastor of that church or by the district superintendent. So I want to make sure people understand that. Then another distinction in certified lay ministries is a certified lay minister. And that is a person who has been called to do a specific job within the church. And it's almost unlimited what it can be. There are specific ones that have been identified, such as nursing and those kind of things. The address that I'm going to put up for you will talk about those. To receive that certification, if you're just going one of the general routes, you have to be a certified lay servant, which means that you've had the basic course and an advanced course. And I would recommend that that advanced course be Discovering Your Spiritual Gifts, because that course is required for certified lay ministers. So you can get two birds with one stone doing that. And then you have to have the 4 modules. And each of those modules looks at different things, everything from administration to pastoral care is included in those. At this time, those are only being offered in our conference through Be a Disciple. Almost everything else, unless there's something happening in part of the conference that I'm not aware of, but I don't think there is. So that's the differentiations. Now, one of the things that people don't understand, and I've tried to make clear to people, is that a certified lay speaker is just that, and they can go to various churches. A certified lay minister has a specific job, whatever it is, and that is assigned by the district superintendent. So this is not somebody that goes around and visits. It's also not someone that always fills the pulpit or always serves as the leader of a congregation, although sometimes they are called to do that. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to try to get that address up and answer any questions that you've got.
Thank you, Jean. And I'm just checking to see if there's any hands raised. We'll take questions multiple times. So, and the questions may arise comparing different credentialings to others. One distinction between certified lay servants and speakers and the certified lay minister is that the CLM does work with the District Committee on Ministry.
Yes.
Whereas the certified lay servant and lay speaker do not.
That's very right. Thank you, Margaret.
Yep. So that's one additional thing to be aware of. All right. Thank you, Jean. Jack Mattingly is going to talk a little bit about the ministry of a licensed local pastor.
Licensed local pastors, a lot of ways, is the next step up in the process, but there's the licensed local pastor has to go through several steps. One, the most important one probably is licensing school. It's offered at ILIF here in our conference, and at I know Claremont and St. Paul's also have it. It's goes over all the basic paperwork things and all the basics of doing a ministry, from preaching to just where do you go to find things. There's it's just a real basic introductory course, and it's required. After that, the local pastor needs to take course of study courses. It's a 5-year program. You can do it in the summer months. Most of the schools have it. ILIF does not. Claremont is, and St. Paul's are closest. I know we have people who have gone to Garrett as well in Chicago, and St. Paul's is in Kansas City. And in these 5-year modules, each year offers 4 classes, and they range from sort of history of the church, Methodism, Wesleyism, sacraments, which is sadly isn't offered until the 3rd year, and I found that to be one of the more important ones when I was going through. Ethics, all sorts of courses. You can take most of them online now too, and there are some even out of Nashville that you can do that way too. But most of the course of study schools now do have some online options. one of the things you do early on too is you do the psychological testing that is required of all candidates for ministry. How much that costs is a little bit up in the air right now. That's being worked on, but right now the current says it's candidate pays $400, the sponsoring church $400, and the Board of Ordained Ministry pays the rest of it. You meet twice a year with the District Committee on Ministry within where you're serving until Margaret, I'm not sure exactly when, because this has changed while I've been through it, but it used to be twice a year as you were going through process, as finishing up course of study, and then once a year afterwards. But so for the last 20 years, I've been meeting with the DCOM a couple times a year. So there's that supervisory thing there. You have basically all the duties of an elder, except you can only perform those in the place that you're appointed. So I'm appointed to Chinook and Harlem, Montana. And so I can only do the duties of a pastor within my charges, which are those two charges. And that's the biggest difference between what an elder does and what a local pastor does, because we preach, we plan worship, we do communion, baptisms, funerals, weddings. And so I think that's keeping it concise. So I'm open for questions.
So can you share, Jack, why you would choose to be an LLP instead of an elder, since it's so similar a ministry?
A lot of us that are local pastors are second career, and so that's one of the reasons. Another reason is the financial commitment of going to a seminary. A local pastor there is a route the local pastor can eventually become an elder by completing the 5-year course of study, taking advanced course of study, and going through the process. But it is a lengthy process. I know David Burt, who was the assistant to the bishop, said it took him 17 years to go from local pastor to a fully ordained elder. So, and then local pastor, sometimes you have some options that you can stay in one place for reasons. Like in my case, I was bivocational and I had a job teaching in the local school district. And so there's that aspect too.
Thank you, Jack. I think I'll underline that licensed local pastors are not required to itinerate, although they are sometimes asked to itinerate.
Yes, they are.
Yeah. All right. Any questions for Jack right at this moment? All right. Thank you. And I'm going to turn now to Megan Berg, who is in a unique position in that she has been an ordained deacon and has recently completed the transition to becoming an ordained elder, and so is uniquely qualified to talk about the distinctions between deacons and elders. Thanks for joining us, Megan.
Absolutely. I get to serve at the community of Arvada, which is northwest of Denver, and I also get to be the chair of the DCOM for the Mile High Metro District. So I do a lot of this work in a different part of our conference. I'm really excited to gather with you guys. I think that we'll start by just talking about deacons specifically. So, the call of the deacon is to an ordained ministry, and so you go through the full work. One of the areas that is a little bit confusing is that they've changed the ordination process multiple times over the years. So there is language within the history of our system that talks about how you can get ordained as a deacon and then you become ordained as an elder. Like you go through it as a step up system. And that is not the way the process works anymore. So elders and deacons are both fully ordained. A deacon is called to I'm going to come up with it, I'm sure of it. Word, service, compassion, and justice. And those 4 areas tie together in that deacons are both called to work within the local church, but also outside the local church. And the primary work of a deacon is about bridging the ministries from the local church into the community. So a deacon who's appointed outside of a local church is also asked to be part of a local congregation, and they play an active role within that congregation in a variety of different ways. Some deacons do a lot of preaching. They're often involved in the worship ministry of a congregation. Some do very little of that, but are participate in other ways within the community. We have deacons that do everything from nursing to running nonprofits to working in with people who are experiencing homelessness in different areas throughout our states. We have some who are in local churches. So I've been in a local church for most of my ministry. I did work in a nonprofit for a period of time. So there's one of the things about deacons ministries is that it's really expansive because it covers all the different aspects of ministry for people. The one thing, Margaret, could I share my screen for a minute? Awesome. If you give me permission.
Angie's gonna have to do that.
Yep.
Thanks, Angie. This document is really helpful if you are trying to kind of figure out these differences in a simplified way. So it identifies the ministry of all Christians within the United Methodist Church. So it does not lift up lay speakers. It starts at certified lay ministers or CLMs. But I just wanted to give you kind of an image, and it helps to get people into the differences and see the ways that we build people in through all these different calls, because everyone is called into ministry. All of our lay people are called into ministry. All of our clergy are called into their own unique ministry. So I just wanted to throw this up here, and I will pass it along. I'm sure Margaret has access to it because it's in the BOM paperwork, but it can be really helpful if you're trying to get into the how to simplify how to speak about each of these areas. So over here in Deacons and Elders, we're just seeing the basics of what it means to be ordained a deacon. You can be appointed in various different places. It is considered an appointment, but deacons are not itinerant. So deacons have to find their own job, but once you've found a job, the cabinet does then approve that, and that it becomes your appointment for your work. This can create some issues. Deacons can have a really hard time finding work. And if they can't find work within a local church, if you are hired as a deacon within a local church, you do meet all of the same needs as an ordained elder. You can't be paid less, which is something that comes up a lot with deacons. You kind of, it's just like having another pastor on staff who has some really unique skills and gifts. And there are people who have stepped out of ministry because they just weren't able to make all of the pieces work. Whereas as a LLP, sometimes you might take a part-time appointment and be bivocational. I see that more frequently with our LLPs than I do with our deacons. And I think it's something that actually will continue to happen more across all of our clergy, will be more bivocational ministry. I think the hard thing about talking about deacons is that there is no box to put them in. There's no simple way to talk about what deacons ministry is, because each person who does it does something different and explores what it means to be, hearing their call and sharing God's love in a unique and independent way. So I'm happy to answer any questions anybody has. All right, Margaret.
All right, I'm not seeing any at this time. So thank you, Megan. And I asked Angie to share about the ministry of an elder as someone who is relatively newly ordained. Yay! You've been through the process fairly recently. So what are the distinctions you see?
Yeah. Thank you, Margaret. And thank you so much, Megan. That was so thorough and excellent. One of the things, and please correct me if I am wrong, please always do that. In addition to the distinction between deacon and elder, where elders are required to itinerate, that is part of the vow that we take, is that we will itinerate, is also elders are able to administer the sacraments. And deacons cannot, unless given specific permission, maybe at a church, sort of like a licensed local pastor. Is that correct?
So
Permission
that's,
is to be given by the bishop.
yeah, permission has to be given by the deacon to deacons by the bishop, and it's gotten a little bit more confusing since like 2016. In it originally, because deacons are not called to sacrament, deacons were not able to administer the sacraments at all. And now it is a little bit more free flowing, especially around communion.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah.
There definitely was that distinction. So thank you so much for clarifying that for me, because I am fully ordained as an elder in full connection and a reverend in the United Methodist Church, but man, do I learn something new every single day. Usually I learn several things every single day. So, well, when I received the call to go into pastoral ministry, I wasn't in this particular denomination. And so I went to a seminary and received my Master of Divinity, not from a Methodist seminary. So I took classes, I finished. And then when I decided that I would go to DCOM, I would become a candidate for ministry, I got certified, all of those things. I needed to take 5 Methodist courses at ILIF. And that is absolutely a requirement. And so for me, the process, start to finish, after a Master of Divinity degree, it was still about 5.5, 6 years. There was a lot of courses to take, obviously starting at the beginning with DCOM. And just for those of you who might wonder, it begins with a local congregation, meeting your district superintendent and any clergy that you know, and reading books like The Christian as Minister, which I believe used to have a pelican on it when I read that. And then meeting with DCOM, again, twice a year in the spring and the fall when you're in process. I remember one time I had to meet with DCOM and I was on a family vacation in another country, and it was Metro DCOM, and they're like, you either do this or you don't get to go on to the next stage. And so I was like in this random airport as they were doing the call to prayer, and I was there, I was focused, I was ready for it. So I would say, in addition to that, it's really, really important for you to own this process, to be ambitious, to be responsible. No one is going to hold your hand through this, no matter what route you are taking or what track. We are absolutely here to support you. But I think a big part of it is making sure that your registrar has all the paperwork, making sure your chair has you on the schedule, making sure those steps of transition from maybe the Board of Ordained Ministry and DCOM, they're talking to each other. So that is some advice that I definitely would give to anyone who is inquiring the ordination process. As far as what elders are kind of given, as Megan was saying with deacons, elders are ordained for ministries of word, so preaching and teaching, the sacrament of communion and baptism, order, lots of fun administration, and service. So from my experience, most elders serve as pastors. I do know some who serve in extension ministry and work in nonprofits. They can also be chaplains, and, serve in those capacities. But it is more common for an elder to fulfill that role of, preaching on a regular basis, administering the sacraments, again, like vision casting, being in charge of the church and where it's going to go, and all of those things. Let's see, so if you are on the track of elder and you are certified and are passed on to the Board of Ordained Ministry after DCOM, you submit a lot of paperwork, which is really fun. And again, I would recommend that you have people who have been through this process to read, not just proofread grammatically, but read for content and talk to you about it. And then you will meet with your reading team from the Board of Ordained Ministry, and they will go over all of that paperwork. And then the entire BOM will vote on whether or not you are going to be recommended to be commissioned as a provisional elder pending clergy session at the next annual conference. So that happens. And if you get that far and it's great, it's like a video game and you're like, woo, we're doing it. Then you have an additional 2 years. Thank you for laughing, Margaret. You have an additional 2 years if you are appointed to a full-time, like if you have a full-time appointment, then you have 2 more years as a provisional elder. And then you meet with the Board of Ordained Ministry again, you submit more paperwork. There's things that you need to be working on. You have a mentor through this entire process. Margaret Gillikin was mine. You meet with that mentor, you get feedback all the time, you work on your humility. And then you meet with the Board of Ordained Ministry and they vote on whether or not they're going to recommend you to clergy session at that next annual conference. Again, at clergy session, the elders and the deacons will vote. And if it is passed, then it's so wonderful and you get to be ordained by the bishop. So my ordination was in October and it was so special because it was in person. And again, just with COVID and everything, I was just so thankful that we got to do it. And Bishop Karen laid hands on me and Margaret was there and all of the cabinet, and it was just so special. So that's kind of the gist. I think if any of those sorts of things speak to you, definitely I would recommend you praying about the elder track for sure. Any questions?
I would just chime in there and say Angie did a really good job of explaining the process, and the process for becoming a deacon is the same. So as far as moving through the DCOM, your own SPRC, your DCOM, headed to the board, all of those pieces, even though your paperwork's a little bit different, all those pieces are the same.
Thank you, Megan.
So I would also point out that literally your first step in the discernment process to ministry in the United Methodist Church, any form of ministry, any level of credentialing, is actually to talk to the pastor of your home church. And following that conversation, especially if you're considering anything beyond lay servant or lay speaker, the next step is a conversation with the district superintendent. And so I'm going to invite Deb and or Jan to share briefly about what that conversation is like. Do you pull out the torture devices for that conversation? How does that go?
Well, basically, as I said in our interviews just a little while ago, we are here to encourage and support and to help potential candidates, ministers discern. We do not play the gotcha game in any way, shape, or form, but instead our authentically excited to hear that people of all ages, whether you're just coming out of school or whether you're in a second or third career, that you feel a call to ministry. And so by contacting us, it's our job then to help shepherd you into the next step of whatever you are discerning and to help that process of discerning. So I see us as that link between you and what you are basically going to figure out that you want to do. I'm trying to think if there's a more of the less theoretical and more practical. Jan, do you have more to add?
Thanks. I would say we are indeed the link, and we're also the one who, if you don't already have a mentor, make sure that that person is in place for you, depending on the specifics of your context. It might be also talking about how best to use your gifts and skills at this point. Is there a church where you could be doing pulpit supply if you're interested in the elder track, for example? And it gives you a chance to try that out and try that on for size and see if that is more of where you want to go, or maybe it helps you shift to something else in that discernment process. So kind of a point of contact and a companion for you in the journey.
And we are also the person that starts that psychological process if you have to take that with CARES. So that's, like Jan said, is part of assigning you a mentor, getting you a mentor, and making sure that we go through the process of getting your psychological, and then just being present.
Do
All
folk
right,
have
thank you.
questions of us of the DS's role in that?
You know, the other piece, I think, and you probably most of you know this, but then if you are in this process and you're at a point where you could provide pulpit supply or supply pastor or be licensed as a LLP, then we are, your DS sits on the cabinet and is a part of that appointment making.
Yeah. Okay, I'd like to open it up to everyone, including the candidates. And is there anything that you might offer as a suggestion for assistance in the process of discernment? I think this is one of the most important questions any of us wrestle with in listening to God and acting upon a calling from God. Well, how do you know? How do you know it's God talking to you? And how do you know, well, where is it that God is inviting me to go? How do I figure that out? So, what does the collective hive mind here have to offer? And it does not have to be the perfect definitive answer. It could be one thing that was helpful to you.
I'd be happy to share.
Thank you, Don.
So when it comes to like, is it God or is it me talking? I was thinking about my career ambitions and goals. And when the call came to me, it was sideways from what the term success meant to me. And when it turns your ideas on their head, and you really have to pray and dig deeper to realize that this is truly it. That was telling for me. I think it's going to be unique for each person, but that made sense for me.
So it sounds like when what you're being told is what you don't want to hear, then that's a genuine call.
It seems possible.
Thank you. Anyone
Margaret?
else? Yeah.
Margaret, I would agree with what she said, because my call, I kept saying no and was eventually realized that God was working through other people to get me to answer. But one thing that I found helpful, and I know others have found helpful, is some sort of spiritual gifts inventory, be it the one that's offered through lay servant ministries, which is a good one, and it's being modified with suggestions from past courses to make it even better. But that made a huge difference for me, and I know it has for others. I know a lady that started out, took that course, decided she wanted to be involved with on the laity side, and as she worked with that and everything, she's now on the path, if she hasn't already, a licensed local pastor.
Very good. Thank you, Jean. Anyone else wish to speak to this?
I think talk to people who are in ministry. Spend time with your pastor, spend time with people who are doing lay speaking, see what is drawing them into that and what has moved them. People of all ages. So I think you can really glean a lot from people who have been in the church for 30 and 40 and 80 years. And then, you know, people who are newer, and what causes them to go, man, what I really want to do is give my time to this ministry or this church in a way that is formative for me or my community. And I would say have those conversations every opportunity you get, now and when you're in ministry, in whatever form that takes.
Thank you, Megan. In the chat, we have a contribution from Alex saying that getting hands-on experience was very helpful for him. And I will add from my own experience that I was one of those reluctant people who did a fair amount of running away. And some of my calls to ministry through the people around me over time got less and less gentle. They began with, have you considered that you might be called to ministry? To which I would say, yes, I've considered, and the answer is no. And and then people would ask me, so when are you going to go to seminary? And I would say never, and stop the conversation. And then, why are you being so stubborn about going to seminary? None of your business, leave me alone. And my suggestion is get curious. Ask them why. Why do you keep saying this to me? What is it that you see that indicates gifts for ministry? I don't see it, but clearly you see something, and apparently I need to get clued in. And so that curiosity with the people around you can be very helpful. I think it is a common thing for human beings called by God to be very biblical in our response. And if you've paid attention to biblical call stories, it is a regular thing for those called by God to either run the other direction, to say no, or to say, what are you talking to me for, God? I'm just, you fill in the blank of whatever small, insignificant, I'm no big deal thought that we have about ourselves. And why would you use me? And it's okay to ask, because truly, when people see God at work in and through you, it is a gift. It's a gift to be in the presence of that unfolding in front of you. And so it's a good thing to follow up and get curious, ask those questions, and be prepared to receive affirmation and support and greater belief in you than perhaps you have in yourself, which would make following a call to ministry all about faith. What do you know? All right. Well, thank you all so much. I'm not seeing any other hands. So one more, Amy.
Hi, Margaret. Hi, friends. I know it's weird to hop in at the end of a call that I've had my camera off, so I'm just going to acknowledge that I have been, but I was sitting outside and sort of taking in the sun and listening and pondering my own call story and all of that. And so I just had a question, and I know that we might not be prepared to answer this, but I thought with this group of people together, we might be able to get to it. I wanted to talk a little bit about clerical attire and what is the perceived understanding for what is appropriate for each of these different stages of ministry that we have described, and if there is a be-all end-all authority on that subject, and if so, who is it and how do we know?
Wow. And by clerical attire, you mean things like a clergy collar?
I
A
do.
robe?
Yeah, a robe, a collar. When are we a reverend? When can we wear a stole? When can we wear a collar? Is that something that the church feels like it has the ability to define? Or are we open for people's own calls to allow for that? I've never heard it officially. I've heard a lot of opinions.
Jan or Deb?
I think I can answer the pastor reverend distinction, but then I'm going to totally say Jan and Deb too after. But when you are a licensed local pastor and you are, again, appointed to a particular church to do the sacraments and all of those things at that particular church, you are a pastor. When you are commissioned, you are a provisional elder, and that is when you can become a reverend. People can still call you pastor, but again, what I think is that's when you become a reverend. So.
So the one major rule is, if you're not a bishop, don't wear purple. All right. No purple clergy shirts. All right. I know that for a fact. Otherwise, I think it is open to somewhat interpretation. I know the idea of stole becomes very, very important when you go from provisional to ordained, because part of that ceremony is putting on the stole, which is a very memorable and meaningful piece of that work. And yet there are pastors that wear stoles in all different. So is there a clerical, I can't even say it. Are there the police, the attire police? Well, I'm not one of those as your DS. I am not going to, but I do think the idea of wearing a collar, the idea of wearing any of those things is, what is the meaning to you and what is it you're trying to communicate with that? I have personally, I don't wear a collar very, very often, but when I go to something that I need to define who I am without question, if I'm going to court for someone, if I'm going to a protest, if I'm going to those kinds of things, then that is when I feel that personally it's very effective. But Amy, to your question is there a list of who and who can't? If there is, I haven't seen it. Jan, I'll turn it over to
I've
you.
never seen one either. I've never seen a list. And maybe this is one of those cultural things of it shifts in different contexts. But I would suggest for our context, the question that Deb raised of, what does this mean to you, and what role, what authority has the church given you? So if in fact you are an LLP or commissioned or an elder, it is appropriate to wear a collar. That's who you are. If you go into the hospital, you're easily identified that way. Having said that, I've almost never worn one. I don't know that I've had a collar on 5 times in 38 years. And that's me. That's my understanding. That's my who I am in ministry. And I would not critique somebody else for wearing one. I think this is where, as United Methodists, we're big tent in our understanding about that.
And I would add that also this is someplace that, as the Mountain Sky Conference, we are perhaps loosey-goosier than other conferences in the United Methodist Connection. I am sure that there are other conferences where the bishop has made a pronouncement about who can and who cannot. And so, Angie, to your point about when are you called a rev, when you get an MDiv, the seminary starts addressing male to you as rev. But depending on where in the country you are, people can start addressing you as rev for all kinds of reasons. The small town that I served in Wisconsin during my second and third years of seminary at Garrett, I opened a checking account at the local bank, and when my checks arrived, they said Rev. Margaret Gillikin. And I had not asked for a title to be put on my checks. The ladies at the bank put it there because they knew I was the pastor of the Methodist Church. So where do you get the title Rev?
It's when people give it to you. I love that.
I would second that as well, because I have never put my name down as reverend on anything, but I get quite a bit of correspondence to reverend. And I also find that newspaper will change it. If I submit something as pastor, oftentimes they'll change it to reverend. So
I always like and appreciate reverend over priest, because then it gets real complicated. Like when your hairdresser thinks you're a priest and you're like, no, I'm not. How much time do you have?
Well, and Megan did just put a list. Well done, Megan. And I do think it's interesting to define our stoles are different. If you're ordained as a deacon or you're ordained as an elder, and Megan, do you want to talk about the difference? Because you now are both. Do you have two different kinds, or?
I do, but I don't wear my deacon ones anymore because now I'm an elder. But the deacon stole crosses over from, actually I should figure that out, from right to left and then goes down, and the elder stoles is what you traditionally see. Though you see a lot of deacons in elder stoles, because deacon stoles are both fairly hard to find and they tear out a lot because you end up sitting on them. So I don't see as many deacons wear them, but they're specifically because of the servant ministry aspect of deacons. And so it's supposed to represent like a towel so that you could wash someone's feet.
Oh my gosh.
I love that.
Thanks. Well, and it does say here, and I love this. Number 1 says, don't wear a purple clergy shirt. Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
And it says, unless you're ordained in UMC, don't wear a stole. But am I going to, I'm not going to enforce that. Maybe I should. This would be a really good discussion to have with our bishop, to see what Bishop Karen says and what her thoughts are on this. So I would be glad to take that to her and see if we get any other definitive decisions.
And I mostly mentioned it not because I really think that there is a right or wrong answer. That's just not really who I am. But I do think that it's good to talk about and good for each one of us as individuals to have an understanding also of the fact that most people that I have encountered have no idea about any of the reasons why we do anything about anything. And so the more that we can help them to understand what it means to us, what it means to the church, what do they see, what roles do they associate with what we're doing? Why are they different colors? Why, any of that stuff. I think, rituals matter. And to me, it would have more to do with being intentional about explaining, if you aren't a reverend, like just come out and say, I do this because, and let people know that is why it feels like it's something that matters to you. just like anything in theology, right? Like there's not necessarily a right, but we need to understand it. We need to be able to, not defend it, but we need to be able to say why we do what we do and why we believe what we believe. And I think that the way that we represent ourselves to each other and the way that we represent ourselves to our congregations matters.
Thank you, Amy. And there you have it, folks. We're going to conclude with a classic clergy conversation in the Mountain Sky Conference, where so often it is not about the rules, it is more about the process and our relationships with one another. And even this conversation is one of discernment, of really being in tune with the Holy Spirit and with the connection between one another. So thank you all so much for your participation and your attendance, and know that we are grateful for all of you who have taken time out of your day to be with us. And we offer blessings for you in your discernment and in your ministry. Thank you so much. And Angie, if you want to stop the recording.